Welcome into Live Now from Fox. I'm your host, Christina Evans. As I said, we're continuing on with today's top stories. We've mentioned it in our first 30 minutes of coverage here on Live Now, but I want to show you this live look that we have there over the Gaza Strip as well, in Israel looking into Gaza. Some of the biggest news today is that Israel and Hamas have now agreed to a Gaza ceasefire and hostage deal. As we know right now, this is what U.S. officials and Qatar officials are saying today. This is raising the possibility of winding down the deadliest and most destructive fighting between these two enemies. We do want to check in with Fox's Trey Yingst as he gives an update there from the Middle East.
Cautiously optimistic, after 467 days of war, Israel and Hamas have reached a ceasefire. The deal will go into effect on Sunday, at which time we'll see the first hostages released. We are getting new details tonight from a senior Hamas official who provided Fox News with a copy of the agreement. The document states that in exchange for the first 9 hostages, Israel will release 110 Palestinian prisoners with life sentences. The deal also constitutes that the Rafah crossing will be ready for the transfer of Palestinian civilians and the wounded, following the release of all female hostages. One other notable line, 50 wounded Hamas fighters will be permitted to leave Gaza daily for medical treatment once the crossing into Egypt opens. Tonight in Tel Aviv, people gathered in the streets reacting to the news. There are mixed emotions here, understanding that many who were taken on October 7th are dead. Inside Gaza, we've seen celebrations, Palestinians chanting and claiming victory. Hamas gunmen were also seen in the streets of major cities as the acting political leader of Hamas said this.
The criminal occupation clashed with the steadfastness of our people and their adherence to their land, and it failed to achieve any of its secret or declared goals. Our people remained steadfast in their land and did not leave or emigrate.
The fact that Hamas is claiming victory will put increased political pressure here in Israel on Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Tonight, Netanyahu spoke with both President Biden and President-elect Trump. In Tel Aviv, Trey Yingst, Fox News.
Our thanks to Trey Yingst there with Fox News, of course, giving us this update, taking another live look outside. Of course, so much is questioning now about what is to come with this deal. Officials from the U.S. and Qatar say the deal would begin on Sunday. But again, Netanyahu's office says that they hope that the final details of this deal will be worked out Wednesday night. I now want to bring into the conversation Richard Goldberg there with the FDD. Rich, thanks so much for being with us here on Live Now from Fox. Of course, this has been something that folks have been waiting on for 15 months, as we know that October 7th, 2023 date will live in infamy as a date when Hamas first attacked Israel there. What are your thoughts, again, as they've now first come to the ceasefire agreement? So many thoughts and talks over the last year or so, but now it seems like today something is in place.
Yeah, this is really a moment of mixed emotions and feelings. You can't have just one state of mind here. Your heart is yearning for the hostages who are alive to come home to their families. It's also breaking for those families who will learn and be devastated that their loved ones are in fact not alive and that might be receiving remains. And even more so for the families that may never receive the remains of their loved ones or those who are still alive if the hostage deal somehow breaks down in the future because Hamas is ultimately a terrorist organization. This is just a phase 1 for 33 hostages if we get through the 42 days. At the same time, a lot of worry. You just saw the statistics there, 100 or more life sentence terrorists being released back into the wild, 1,000 down the line, some of the worst terrorists being released back onto the battlefield against Israel. Of course, also the potential for Hamas to regain control of the Gaza Strip for another October 7th to happen in the future, something we would never want to see happen and can't allow to happen, and certainly Israel will never allow to happen. So this is a real tense moment where the country in Israel, those who support Israel, have wanted to see these hostages come home for so long. At the same time, as we heard just today from National Security Advisor designate Mike Waltz, Secretary of State designate Marco Rubio, yesterday from Secretary of Defense designate Pete Hegseth, all saying together that they are committed to seeing Hamas destroyed in Gaza. how that squares with this hostage deal is still going to be something that plays out in the days and weeks ahead.
I do want to, while I have you, Rich, talk a bit about what Benjamin Netanyahu is saying at this time, the prime minister there in Israel. We do know that he said that Hamas has now backtracked on some of those earlier agreed terms. Can you sort of speak to that and what that means over the next few hours as we're waiting for him to also fully confirm that this ceasefire will go into action on Sunday?
Well, there are reports right now that Hamas is trying to change the terms after the deal has been inked. In particular, the report that's emerging is that Israel would have veto power over certain names on the list if they are truly very symbolic type terrorists who could inspire masses of further radicalization and terrorists. They want to be able to say, no, this person is really a leader of the jihadist movement. They're not getting out of jail no matter what you ask. Hamas is saying, no, we put forward the names, you let them out of jail. We will see how that plays out. But I think important, we all probably watched the Qatari prime minister deliver the news at a press conference in Doha today. Important to remember, the Qataris are one of the main sponsors of Hamas. So what we actually saw was Hamas's lawyer deliver the news that Hamas's lawyer had brokered a deal on behalf of its client, Hamas, and is trying to speak as though Hamas is some sort of an equal partner, like a state to the state of Israel, a democracy. It is not. It is a brutal terrorist organization. And so let's keep in mind that every minute, every hour, every day that passes will be one of bated breath for the families because they don't know what moment Hamas is going to pull some trick and this is all going to collapse.
And Rich, as you mentioned, that we do know that earlier today, Israel said that nearly 100 people are still captive there inside of Gaza and that the military believes that at least a third are dead. Can we sort of now talk about the three-phased agreement and how that sort of plays in? I want to show you with the graphic here what is expected. The deal will be implemented again in those three phases. The first phase to include prisoner exchange, troop withdrawal, and increased age. Are you able to break down these three phases and what is to come over the coming days?
Yeah, and this is where, as you go along the three phases, from a strategic perspective, from a national security perspective, both for the United States and for Israel, this becomes increasingly difficult and problematic, where we're going to have to make some tough choices, and more than us, the Israelis will be making some tough choices. Early on, the Israelis will be making some very tough concessions of releasing all those terrorists for this humanitarian category of women, the elderly, and those who are deemed very sick or injured that would be released. And by the way, of these 33, we're still told it's possible only 23 are alive. We may find dead bodies that come back even within this first phase in exchange for blood-hearted terrorists. The next phase, though, in that second phase, which needs to get negotiated during the first phase, and we don't know that that will happen, is where Israel starts making much more painful strategic concessions as far as withdrawing its security control of key areas of Gaza, which would allow Hamas to reconstitute, regroup, and regain control more than it already may have in certain areas of northern Gaza. And certainly by the end of the third phase, in that second phase, you're getting all the male IDF soldiers out, which, by the way, this is an open question. Idan Alexander, an American who was serving in the Israeli Defense Force, we understand maybe in that category of the second phase. We did not get him apparently in this first phase. 2 Americans may be coming out, but the third living American, we understand, Idan Alexander, you'll remember him, he was in the video, released the propaganda video speaking to President Trump. He may not be in this first tranche. That would be a big strategic error if he's not. But in that second tranche, the male IDF soldiers would be coming out at the same time Israel is being forced to make strategic decisions that could hand Gaza back to Hamas. This is why you're seeing a lot of family members, by the way, of certain hostages speaking out against the deal because they're afraid that their loved ones will be left behind. Because in the end, Israel can't commit national suicide by going forward to phase 2 or phase 3, and that you may just get the hostages out that you get in phase 1.
I'm glad you brought up as well, just during that portion where you were speaking there, you talked about Benjamin Netanyahu, of course, we do want to put up this tweet that the Israeli Prime Minister account put out on X, saying that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu spoke this evening with U.S. President-elect Donald Trump and thanked him for his assistance in advancing the release of the hostages and for helping Israel to bring an end to the suffering of dozens of hostages and their families. I want to ask you, Rich, here, of course, there's been a lot of conversation. We do know that President Biden also mentioned the ceasefire agreement in his farewell speech just a few hours ago there from the Oval Office. And again, we've also seen reports that elect Trump is also taking some credit for this deal. Overall, what are your thoughts on this, and how do you think that Israel is going to be moving forward with the next administration?
Yeah, the best way to think about this is the framework. The deal itself is Biden's deal. It's pretty much the same deal that was on the table many months ago over the summer that Israel, by the way, did accept, and Hamas reneged on and continued to play games on and has been playing games over ever since. The difference here, of course, is the Trump effect of his election and his threat that if Hamas didn't take a deal, if there wasn't a hostage deal like this, that he would make sure hell was to pay for Hamas and its sponsors. And so this happened, something similar like this a few weeks ago after the election. You recall a ceasefire between Hezbollah and Israel in Lebanon. The framework, again, was a Biden framework largely that had failed for months. And suddenly after Trump's election, Hezbollah says, you know what, we'll disconnect ourselves from Hamas, will agree to a ceasefire. So the bad guys are sort of cutting their best deal ahead of January 20th. Now, I think after January 20th, we will see an administration that does stand shoulder to shoulder with the Israelis. If they have disagreements, they're happening behind closed doors. If there's tough conversations, they're not spilling out into the public the way that we have seen with the Biden administration. And instead, you're seeing robust pledges of support from every nominee so far and designate for a national security post. And by the way, tough talk about what's to come for Iran, the real existential threat both to Israel and the United States. So I do expect there to be a very positive relationship. What happens to this hostage deal, what happens to our next steps to make sure we eradicate Hamas in Gaza will be a subject of intense conversation in the weeks ahead. But I do think we're going to have a much more positive, strong U.S.-Israel relationship. That's going to be great for the region. It's going to be great globally.
All right, and Rich, before I let you go, I have to ask you, what is the possibility here that either Hamas or Israel aren't able to keep this deal in place? Where do you see the region going from there?
Yeah, obviously the Saudis have a big voice right now. The looming potential of Saudi-Israeli normalization had obviously been held up by the ongoing conflict. If there is an opportunity for the Saudis to step up right now and say, we would like to normalize, and we will not make it hard for Israel right now to normalize so far as the ceasefire continues, that could be a very big incentive for the Israelis to keep the ceasefire going. If the Saudis do not step up in that way, they don't have that incentive there, and you'll be faced with this dilemma I talked about before about withdrawing fully from Gaza to complete the third phase and handing Gaza back to Hamas, which is an unacceptable end state. And then the other big question mark is, what will policy look like towards Iran? Most expectations are the maximum pressure campaign of Donald Trump will return from his first term. The Iranians are already reeling from the Israeli military strike on its air defense. They're having domestic energy problems right now, an economy that's in free fall, afraid of Donald Trump returning, Assad's fall in Syria, Hezbollah and Hamas both being decimated. So what U.S. policy looks like towards Iran, what the Saudis do as far as normalization with Israel, and what Israel does as far as its strategic decisions vis-a-vis Gaza will all be important factors to watch.
And certainly something that we're going to continue following here on Live Now from Fox, I should say. Richard Goldberg there from the FDD here to help us break down the very latest with the Gaza ceasefire and hostage deal. Thanks so much for being with us.